Okay, and we are live. So just real quick. So hi, I'm Yuvia, one of the print coordinators. Um, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am self-taught with Photoshop. I think there's still a lot left for me to learn. Um, but I'm excited to be doing this, and I'll pass it over to Will.
All right. Hi, I'm Will. I go by he, him, his pronouns. I'm a third year. And I also am self-taught in Photoshop, but I've been working with it for multiple years now, and I'm also one of the signers for the Shutterslug Photography Club on campus. Anyways, I'm looking forward to the rest of this workshop with you guys.
And hi, everybody. My name is Sabrina. I go by she, her pronouns. I am one of the print coordinators, and I don't know much about Photoshop at all. I'll be learning with y'all, but I'm here to moderate the chat to make sure everybody's questions get answered today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so to go off of that, if at any point during the workshop, if you're following along, you think that we should slow down a little bit, or you have a question or some type of error, you can either raise your hand or send a message in the chat, and Sabrina will, interrupt us and let us know that there's something that needs to be addressed. And before we actually get started, did anyone have any problems downloading Photoshop and getting those images on their computer? Okay, I hope that's a no and everyone's good. Okay, awesome. So if you want to go ahead and just launch Photoshop, you don't have to worry about creating a file just yet. We will cover that just so you're ready to go once we get started with that portion. So first, we're just going to go over a little bit of some general ethics stuff about, or specifically for print orgs. So if you've attended media law or media ethics, this is probably covered. You should know this. We just wanted to go over it real quick. So when you're taking submissions from students, it's important to kind of recognize the difference between transformative and derivative art. So derivative is just like a general meaning is that it's kind of just ripped off from the original. So it can be labeled for copyright infringement. It's basically just stealing, I'm not in those words, but just like passing off someone else's art as your own. Whereas transformative can use elements from the original piece or like modify them in some way. And those are generally more accepted under, like for our purposes right now. So that's just one thing to look out for when you're going through submissions. And then as far as editing submissions that you receive, we just wanted to be clear that the tools that we're teaching you today aren't really meant as like an excuse to change stuff that folks are sending you. For example, but at the same time, they can be useful. For example, Shutterslug last year put a little disclaimer in their submission form saying, we may have to crop this to fit better. We may have to size it if the pixel sizes are too large, as well as mild color correction to ensure that the colors will print accurately. So that's the most important part, is to just make your membership and anyone who's submitting aware of what might happen to their images once they pass into your hands. And always be sure to communicate with them if you end up, you know, wanting to crop something into a square to fit better into your layout, it's better to have that communication right from the get-go than to face like problems later. So if anyone has any questions about that, feel free to send them. But if there are no further questions, we can get right into the workshop. Okay, take it away, Will.
All right, so I am going to go ahead and share my screen so y'all can follow along with what I'm doing. Right there. Okay, so can everyone see my Photoshop window here? I mean, I'm sure Sabrina will call me out if you can't. All right, so the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to create a file. So your Photoshop window should look something like this to start out with. It may vary depending on your operating system and what version of Photoshop you're using, but somewhere you should see this Create New button. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Create New, and that's going to bring up this menu right here. So the main two things we want to pay extra attention to when we create a file are aspect ratio and resolution. So as you can see, you can adjust your aspect ratio over here and your resolution directly underneath that. So what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be using a couple of sample images that you have. So the first of these that we're going to use is, I believe, this one, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if that's right. One moment. Oh, okay, not that one. Wait. Oh, okay. One moment. I apologize. I got the wrong image out when I set this up, but it'll only take a couple moments to fix. Where is where is it? Okay, give me 1 second. There, found it. Boom. There we go. Okay, so we're going to be using this image to start out with. So the way we're going to check this is actually, you can see if I hover over it, it says 5424 by 3616 pixels. So what we're going to do is, since we're using that as our base image, we are going to set that as the aspect ratio. And as you can see, I already have it set in there automatically, 5424 by 3616 pixels. And you want to make sure this is set to pixels. Then we're going to want to set the resolution to 300 pixels per inch. Make sure that's at pixels per inch. The default on Photoshop is around like 74 for some reason, but you're going to want to up it to 300. All right, so we're going to create our template, and now we have this thing here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the photo we're using, and just so everyone can see, we're using this photo first, the one of the person facing away from the camera. So we're going to take that file, and we're going to click on it, and drag it into Photoshop, like so. And now our photo is in Photoshop. And as you can see, it's kind of small. And that is because of the resolution problem that I mentioned earlier. I exported this photo a long time ago, and I exported it at 74 pixels per inch. So when you put it into a frame that's 300 pixels per inch, this happens. And that's why you want to always make sure that everything you do is at 300 pixels per inch. So to deal with that problem, we're actually just going to, before we rasterize it, we're going to resize it. And when you first put an image into Photoshop, you can just kind of drag it around and resize it like this. So you're just going to drag it like this until you get the right size. If you're super caring about the exact pixel dimensions, you can actually hold, I think on Windows it's Alt, and then on Mac, I think it's going to be, I think, Option, but it might also be Alt. Sabrina, if you could, if you could type in the chat which one it is. But either way, if you hold Alt and then scroll, you'll be able to zoom in. And then if we zoom in on that corner, we can actually adjust the pixel dimensions exactly how we want them to be. So 5424 by 3616. All right. So now we have our image exactly the size we want it to be, and we're going to hit enter.
Will,
Oh, no. Yes. Yes.
we have a raised hand. I also think we might have sent out the other photo that you
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. Okay.
in the demo.
Okay. In that case, let me put this photo in the folder really quick, and if everyone wants, I can wait a second for everyone to get that photo and catch up to where I am. Is that all right?
Was that your question, Bill?
Yeah, that was. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you.
All
You
right,
had
let me.
a separate file that we used.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, let me send the proper photo over. Okay.
I have a quick question about how to figure out what the like size and resolution is when you're working with a Mac, because I don't think that the hover thing works when you're on a Mac.
Oh, in terms of like clicking and dragging around? Or...
No, so like when you looked up the dimensions and the resolution, it was
yeah.
by
Okay.
hovering your mouse over the file.
Gotcha. Okay, I can help with that. So that is a bit more difficult because it does vary between Mac and Windows a lot. But the other way that you can do that, if I can find the folder where that went. Wait, okay, there it is. Okay, so if we go to this folder, we have our images. And if you actually right-click on the image, and then on Mac, is there a thing that says properties somewhere on that list?
I think there's like a get info one.
Yeah, that should do the trick. So if you go there, and somewhere in that get info area, there should be the aspect ratio. On Windows, if you go to details, it'll show you it right there. But on Mac, it's going to be a different pathway, but it will likely be in that get info tab.
Is there supposed to be a place where it says the resolution too? Or is it
the resolution, yeah, in terms of the resolution, the main problem with that is I think it might say the resolution somewhere, but if it doesn't, that's not a huge deal, because a lot of times when you're importing like people's submissions and stuff, people will be exporting their images at all different kinds of resolutions. So you're going to have to do some resizing anyway, oftentimes, no matter what. The main thing is just to always be exporting your stuff at 300 pixels per inch so that whenever you work with your own stuff, you can always have it be uniform. But in terms of other people's stuff, inevitably, you're going to have to do some resizing. All right, so has everyone pretty much caught up to this stage now? Or do we still have to wait a little bit? All right, I think...
Actually,
oh, yes.
well, we had one comment to wait just 1 more minute.
Okay, yeah. And let me... oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if there's a way to change the resolution after you've opened the photo, or...
After you've created your project, the only way to change the resolution is, to my knowledge, to actually go back and recreate the project.
Okay.
You might be able to like edit the resolution once you've created the project, but if you've already edited anything, then that's going to just mess everything up. So oftentimes, if you accidentally created it at the wrong resolution, it's just easier to close out the project and open a new one.
Okay, cool.
We've also got one more question about clarifying which picture we're going to be using now.
Yes. So we're using the one that's on the screen right now with the person facing away. I put it onto the Google Drive. It's just now. I had accidentally put the wrong picture into that Google Drive beforehand. If you don't have time to go and download that new picture, you can use the one that's already in there with the person facing the camera. That's no big deal. We'll be doing virtually the same thing with both of them. All right, so, and also feel free to ask if you are having trouble with anything and need a little help. Oh, yeah, for the width/height, so you'll probably see when you put the photo into the project, it'll be like smaller with a bunch of white border on the outside. So what I did was I just set the width and height to 5,424 by 3,616 pixels. And I did that by like zooming in and dragging until it was the exact amount. Yeah, so that is not a huge deal though. I can put that aspect ratio in the chat as well if need be. 5, 4, 4 by 3, 6.6. Okay. All right. So in that case, I think we are going to continue. And all right, so the next thing we're going to do is real quick, before we do anything else, we're going to rasterize this image. And how you do that is you go to this part right here, which is your layer menu, and you right click on the layer you're on. So this photograph right here, you right click on it and it'll open up this menu. And if you go up to here, you'll see the Rasterize Layer option, and you're going to want to left click on that. And all that does is it's going to allow us to edit this image, because unless you rasterize it, there are a lot of ways that it won't allow you to edit it. So now that we rasterize the image, before we do any of the super editing stuff, let's talk about framing and color rules. So first of all, framing. So in terms, and by the way, most of the rules that I'm going to talk about here also apply to print and graphic design, because they're very general. So in terms of framing, the rules for Photoshop and graphic design are very similar to photography in general. So you have your rule of thirds rule, which basically splits the frame into columns and rows of 3. So as you can see here, this is a good example because we have our subject here in the left third for the most part, and then the 2 thirds on the right are reserved for the background. So rule of thirds is always a good one to keep in mind. And then the other thing you really want to keep in mind when you're talking about framing is your depth layers. So right here, we have our subject who is in the foreground. Then we have these kind of plants and everything, and this kind of hill in the midground, and then this whole area back here in the background. And what we can actually do is we can actually split the foreground, midground, and background into separate layers, if just to demonstrate that easier. A lot of times if you're doing like, yeah, Emily just asked, do we have access to this photo? I put this photo onto the Google Drive just now. If you don't have time to go back and download it, the photo I put in with the person, there should be another photo that has the person facing the camera. and that photo will also work just fine if you don't have time to go get access to this one. So what we can do is we can split foreground, midground, and background into separate layers. So this right here is the Lasso tool, and it basically allows you to select an area by clicking and holding and then dragging. So as you can see, we've now selected this area. And so what we can do is we can go ahead and just kind of generally drag here. And now it did kind of a weird diagonal there because I forgot to go like that. But yeah, so that's generally just highlighting our foreground. And then we can highlight our midground here and then highlight our background like so. All right, so foreground, midground, background, very cool. So now let's talk. And when you're dealing with overlapping images, it's good to have a nice foreground, midground, and background. So now let's talk about color a little bit. So in terms of color, if I can find my notes on that real quick. In terms of color, there are a few different types of ways you can arrange color, as you can see on this kind of very nice workshop slide that one of my fellow Shutterslug signers helped create. You have a lot of different ways you can arrange color, and it's good to be aware of all these different ways. I'm not going to go super in depth on all of the different ways you can arrange color now in the interest of time, but it's good to know that these are kind of the general ways in which you can combine color to where it's pleasing to the eye. And you can see some examples of how those different types of color combinations are used in photography, and which also, of course, applies to graphic design. Now, we're going to get into the editing a little bit now. So how do we deal with and adjust color and values in our image? So if we go to the edit tab, no, the image tab up here, and we click on that, then we have this down here which says adjustments. And there's a few different things we can do here. So first of all, we have brightness and contrast, which is exactly what it sounds like. You have these two sliders that show up when you click on brightness and contrast. So if you drag the brightness slider up, image gets brighter. If you drag it down, image gets darker. Pretty straightforward. You can also adjust the contrast, and what the contrast slider does and what contrast is in general is it just makes the darks darker and the lights lighter. So if we turn the contrast up, darks get darker, lights get lighter, and if we turn the contrast down, everything becomes a more similar value. So that is a nice tool to have. Next, if we go back up to image and we go back to adjustments, then we also have our Vibrance tool. And this pulls up two sliders, Vibrance slider and Saturation slider. And these two sliders are actually different. They both increase the kind of the vibrancy, for lack of a better word, of color, but they do so in different ways. So our first slider, Vibrance, is kind of like a smart version of this slider, Saturation. So if we pump up Saturation, what it does is it just increases the vibrance of every color in the frame equally. So we have these really vibrant greens now, this vibrant blue up here, and this very, very vibrant red face now. Vibrancy is a little different. When we increase the vibrancy slider, it increases different types of tones at different rates. So if we crank up vibrancy, you can see the greens get brighter and the blues get brighter a lot faster than our person's face. Even at like 68, 60 vibrance, this face still looks like a normal face. Whereas if we go back to saturation everything gets more vibrant a lot quicker, but our face now looks like a weird red man, and that's not good. We don't want Martian. So we're going to want to keep those at 0 for now, but that is like, if we wanted this image to just be a little more poppin', we would crank up the vibrancy a bit. So that's how you just vibrancy and contrast and all that stuff. And one last thing on this menu is the hue and saturation. So when we click hue and saturation, we get this last menu here. And this menu has our hue slider, our saturation slider, and our lightness slider. So there are 2 different ways we can adjust stuff using this. We can either adjust hue, saturation, and lightness just normally. So if we adjust our hue, you can see it keeps kind of the basic color profile of everything, but it changes things once again in kind of a smart way. But it still drastically changes things. And you can just kind of change things however you want. And then saturation does the same thing here that it does in the other slider. It just, in this version, you can change it along with hue. And then lightness is kind of weird. It kind of, if brightness is vibrancy, then lightness is saturation, if that makes sense. Like, brightness is just smart lightness. Lastly, what we can do once we know what all those do is we can hit this colorize block right here, and we can check it. And what that does is it kind of makes everything monochromatic. So everything is now a different shade of the same color. So now if we adjust hue, as you can see, it just changes what that color is.
I'm sorry, Lottie.
No, it's okay. I'll be on it until you're on.
Okay. Just so we can
I mean,
hear you
I
saying.
get what he's doing now. He's just playing with the
He's playing with
things.
shit. Yeah.
There's nothing like that's gonna change my life.
Are there any questions right now? Okay, I apologize. Sorry. All right. Anyways, so yeah. So as you can see, we can just do that. And if we undo the colorize, then it brings everything back to normal. So all of that stuff is a good way to mess around with color, vibrancy, contrast, all of that. And then in terms of framing, how you would do framing with a piece of graphic design, you have to know how to move around and resize your image. So there are separate move and resize tools in Photoshop. So if we go to this bar over here, we have this little plus sign with arrows thing, and that's the move tool. So if we left click on the move tool, we can then move our image around, as you can see. And Photoshop has this nice thing where it kind of locks it into place when it's centered, so we don't have to worry about losing the center. And it also tells us how many pixels we've moved up or down. Yeah, so that's the move tool. But the nice thing is if we hit Control T, and on a Mac that's going to be Command T, then that actually enables the free transform mode. And now we can left click to drag something around, or we can go to one of these edges and hover over it and resize it as well, which is very convenient. So we don't have to go through the whole process of doing the move tool and all that. 3616. Okay, let me get that back to the right pixel size real quick. Oh, wait. There we go. Perfect. And then also what you can do is you can even, while you're in this free transform mode, if you go to here and unlink the width and the height by clicking this little chain button here, then you can actually just ruin everything. But it can be useful in some situations to do this. But anyways, we're not going to do that right now. And when you want to exit this free transform mode, you can just click on the layer or press enter or do any number of things. All right. Next, we're going to talk about layers. So that is right here. We have our layer menu. So what I'm going to do is I am going to drag a second image, which is going to be this dog image here. And I'm going to drag the dog image onto our first image. And as you can see, it is also small because of the resolution problem. But once again, we now know how to resize things, so it's not a huge deal. So if we just resize this real quick. Yeah, the resizing can be kind of a pain. Usually I'm not so diligent about getting it the exact pixel size. It's not usually a big deal, but I figured for the sake of the thing. And yeah, that's close enough. All right, so we have our dog now. And we're going to rasterize our dog before we do anything else to make sure that we can edit it in all the ways we need to edit it. So now we have our dog over here and our person down here. And as you can see, our person is no longer here because the dog is on top of them. But with the layer menu, we have the power to change that. So if we click and hold on our dog layer and we move it down here and we release, now our person is on top. So you can change the order of layers, which is very important. Now, and you can also resize layers. So if we do Control T or Command T again, and we make this layer smaller, you can see that our person is behind it. And I'm actually going to leave it like this for now because we're going to be working with these two images in tandem. So, yeah, so a very important thing we're going to do right now is layer masks. And this is very important because it's a fail-safe so that you don't accidentally mess everything up. It's not something that you necessarily need to use, but it will save you a lot of headache if you accidentally delete something early in your process and then want it back later, but can't get it because you deleted it. So, the way you do a layer mask is you go to this little block down here, the little rectangle with the circle in it. So if you left click on, and you have to make sure that the layer you want to add a layer mask to is highlighted. So we're going to be adding a layer mask to our dog here. So if you left click with the layer mask tool, then it creates this little thing over here, and it doesn't change anything here, but what this is it's added a layer mask. And what you can do is you can edit the layer mask instead of editing your image to preserve the original image in case you need to go back to it later. So the way a layer mask works is that it's just a kind of block that sits over your image, and the block's transparency is tied to its value. So the darker the block is, the more transparent it is. So what we can do is we can actually, and right now the layer mask is enabled, so anything we do to this image won't happen to the image, it'll happen to the layer mask. So we can actually go to, let's say, our paint tool, like this little paintbrush tool right here. And then the way you adjust the way you want a paintbrush is you go up here to this little drop down arrow here, and you have the size and hardness sliders here. So we can make our paintbrush bigger, like we can make it really big or really, really big, or we can make it smaller. We're probably going to want it like about, I don't know, this big. And then hardness just adjusts how hard or soft the edges of the paintbrush are. So we'll leave the hardness at around like 80% right now. So now we have our paintbrush, and down here you can see we have these little squares here. These squares represent what color we are currently using. And also, someone just real quick asked where the layer mask tool is located. If you go down to this rectangle with the circle in it and click that while you have a layer selected, it'll add a layer mask to that layer. So Now we have our paintbrush selected, and back to these squares here. So these set what color we're using. So we have a foreground color and a background color. So right now our foreground color is set to black and our background color is set to white. And we can actually switch which one is which by using this little thing right here, which is convenient. So what you can do is if you want to change the color, we're not going to change the color right now, but if you want to change the color, you can left click on this square right here, and this whole color menu will pop up. So you can pick your hue along this slider here, and then you can pick your value on the y-axis and saturation on the x-axis. And it just shows up like this little thing right here. And you can basically pick whatever color you want, or if you go outside of this window, you can actually, there's this little eyedropper tool that has replaced my cursor, and you can actually pick a color based on something in the image. So like if we choose this color, it's now a nice kind of, well, I guess that's actually almost white. But if we go down here, then it's not picking the color that it should pick, but I'm not sure why that's happening. But hey, okay. Oh, you know what? It's because we're on the layer mask that's over the dog. That's why. Okay. So everything is white now because the layer mask is white. Okay, got it. Anyways, you get the idea. So we're going to stick with black for now. And what we can do, back to the layer mask, which we kind of deviated from a little bit, what we can do is we can actually erase parts of this dog by painting the layer mask black. So changing the color for the purposes of the layer mask doesn't really do anything. But let's say you were trying to like fill in, like let's say you were just trying to make a canvas and you were trying to make a green canvas instead of a white canvas. You could do that by I'll go into like the bucket fill tool and the paint tool a little bit later, but you could pick the color and change the color that way. Yeah. Okay, Yuvia asked when you're editing spreads. Yeah, or not asked, but what Yuvia said, when you're editing spreads, you can use the color picker to change font color, background color, all that stuff. All right, so anyways, back to what I was saying, we can erase parts of this image by painting the layer mask black. So if we do that, dog has no more nose. Dog nose is gone. And we did that by painting black part of the layer mask. Now, let's say you're later on in your process and you say, oh no, I want this dog's nose back. Where did it go? What you can do is you can go down here and you can right click and you can right click in here. You have to make sure you right click in this little rectangle and not just on the layer as a whole, because that's just going to bring up the normal layer menu. But if you right click in the little box that represents the layer mask, you right click there. If you say disable layer mask goes away and dog's nose is back. Or you can just straight up delete the layer mask as well, which is what we're going to do. So layer mask is completely gone now, and you can recover it with, by the way, another thing. Anything you do, you can undo by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z. So if I hit Control-Z, the layer mask is back now. Very important tip that will save you a lot of hardship. So I'm once again going to delete the layer mask now, though. Okay. Yeah. So the layer mask is just for, like Yuvia said, just a way to edit your photo without getting rid of parts of it permanently. So last thing we're going to talk about when it comes to layers is layer merging. So with these layers, what we can actually do is make these layers into one singular layer. Usually you want to save layer merging until the very end of your project, because once you merge two layers together, they cannot be edited independently. So if you merge two layers together, edit them a ton, and then you're like, wait, I actually wanted to edit that layer, but not the other one, can't do that anymore. But once you're at the end of your project, it's a nice way to kind of crunch everything down and consolidate it all so it's not just a chaotic mess of layers. So if we right click on our top layer here, you'll see there's these options, merge down and merge visible, and they do exactly what they sound like they do. If we hit merge down, then it merges our two images. So now if we move everything, you can see our two images are now one image. Otherwise, we're going to undo that because we don't want those to be separate. But if we do right click and we say merge visible, then now even the background, everything is one layer. And if we move everything around now, we actually can't because it locked the layer because we merged it with our locked background. And usually you don't want to do that. But what you can also do is you can toggle certain layers. So let's say we have like 10 layers and we want to merge them all together, but we can't, we want to merge them all together, but we don't want to merge this locked background. So instead of just merging them all down one by one by one, we can toggle this background to be invisible and then do merge visible. And then that'll just merge those two layers. And that's extremely helpful. All right, so now that we've gone over layers, let's talk about text. So text is obviously not super useful for image editing, but it is extremely useful for graphic design. So in terms of text, we have our text tool right here, which is the one with the big T on it. So if we go to this big T right here, and we're going to left click on that, and we can now drag a box. And this box is going to be where this layer of text is contained. So we're just going to make one the size basically of the canvas with a little bit of a border. So now we have our text box here. And as you can see, our text, first of all, is white, and second of all, is very small. And we want to change both of those things. Also, Francis asked, sorry, I think I missed this. How do you change the background color when dealing with layer masks? So background color and layer masks are two completely separate issues. You're not going to be, layer masks are purely for editing images when you don't want to lose the original image. Background color, we're gonna cover in a second. It's not related to layer masks. Anyways, so right now we have this text box, but our text is super tiny and it's all white. How do we fix this? So we're going to highlight all of the text, and whenever you do text edits, you want to make sure that your text is highlighted. So over here on this right part here is where all of our text editing options are. So first of all, you'll see we have the color option here. We're going to want to change that to black. And as you can see, this is where this kind of color window starts to come more into play, is whenever you're adjusting the color of something, this window is going to show up. So, so we're going to change the text color to black, or we can change it to whatever other color. We could even change it to, I don't know, green. Now it's green. Or we could change it to blue. Now it's blue. We'll leave it at blue for now because why not? And fun fact, when you highlight text in Photoshop, the text will show up through the highlight as the inverted color to what it actually is, which is interesting. Anyways, so we have our placeholder text here. Let's see. Yeah, so since we have our placeholder text here, we want to make it bigger. So we have our font size, which is this right here. And if we just do this drop-down menu, we can select a font from one of these pre-fonts, just like Microsoft Word or something like that. Or we can type in a specific font number here, like this. Or a third option, we can actually go a little bit to the left where this little t and big T are, and you'll notice two little arrows are going to appear on the side of your cursor. And if you hold down left click and drag left or right, you can actually adjust the font on a slider, which can be extremely helpful if you're trying to get just an exact size, but you don't know what the number is. Yeah. And then these things over here are similar. You have this, which is the vertical spacing between the lines. So adjust it, you make it really big, you can make it not so big, you can make the lines completely overlap each other. Don't know why you would do that, but you can. Yeah. And then this down here is the spacing between the letters. So we can make that really wide, or we can make it really tiny, or we can leave it just right in the middle where it's supposed to be. And then last but not least is this tool. I'm going to be honest, to this day, after multiple years of working with Photoshop, I have no, oh, it's kerning. Is that what that is? Okay, well, this tool doesn't matter, basically. I guess you might find a place to use it at some point, but it's not super important, especially for a beginning tutorial. So for now, just don't worry about it. Last but not least, we can change what font we're using. Photoshop has a huge selection of default fonts, which is very, very convenient. And you can use pretty much any of them you want. There are some fonts that are copyrighted. Most of them aren't, but it is good to check in. Okay, so someone asks how to open the properties window on the right. So the properties window should open automatically when you're on a text layer. If it doesn't, then you can probably go to Window and then check mark properties, because let's see, if I uncheck it, then it goes away. But then if I go to Window and I check it again, it's back. So make sure that the properties window is checked under the Window menu if it's not already there. But it should be there by default. But if it's not, that's how you fix that. All right, awesome. And then
sorry, Will, we've got one more question. Emily is asking where the text editing window is.
oh yeah, is this?
I was able to find it. Yeah, the properties window.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right. So also, as you can see, since we did other stuff and stopped editing, you'll see the editing capabilities of this text have gone away. That's no big deal. If you go back down to this layer, go where it has that big T down there and double click there, we'll re-edit, we'll re-enter the text editing mode, so you can go back and edit your text. So now, now you've seen you can adjust the font. I guess we'll stick with Agency. It's a nice font. But you can do font size, this, that, and the other thing. Now let's say you have this exactly the way you want it, but you want to move it around. Well, you move it around the same way you move around any other layer. So if we do Control T or Command T on a Mac, then we get our transform window and we can move it around just like we would move around an image. And we can also resize it just like we would resize an image. And that'll help a lot when you're trying to kind of format graphic design and you say, okay, well, maybe I want this text a little bit more down or a little bit bigger. And instead of going in and making the font a little bigger, you can just free transform it, which is convenient. All right, so I think that, oh yeah, one last thing that we're going to talk about, which is a little weird, is outlines. So a lot of times, we're not going to get super into like super crazy text editing here, but we will cover outlines. So outlines are weird because you can outline stuff in photos really easily, but you cannot really do that as easily in text. And this is also a good opportunity for me to talk about the select tool. So okay. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit because we are running a bit short on time. So let's take this person and let's say we want to cut this person out from this background. The way we're going to do that, there are a couple different ways to do that. Firstly, you can hit select up here and then do select subject. And that is just going to do a smart select and it's going to find the subject. And as you can see, it did a really good job. We have our subject. And you got to make sure when you do select subject to have the layer you want to select the subject of highlighted. So we did, now we have our subject. And let's say we want to cut this subject out from this background. We can either do that if we want to get rid of the background entirely, we can do select inverse and then press the backspace or delete button, and that'll just get rid of the background entirely. Or if we don't want to do that, we can have our selection not inverted, so it's still the person, and we can do layer via cut or layer via copy. So layer via copy is going to create a copy of that person cut out. So as you can see, now we have this person. And then layer via cut is going to make them their own separate layer that is now separate from the image, as you can see. All right, so now we have our cutout man. So let's get rid of this background, and now we just have our man. Let's say we want to add an outline to our man. Let's see, and also let me make sure. Okay, yeah, so UV is going to cover the pen tool in a second, so I won't go over that. But if we want to add an outline to this person, we can do select and no, not select, sorry. What we want to do is we want to select them first. And the way we do that actually is we have him on a separate layer by himself, so we can actually right click on the box, not the layer, but the box. And we can do select pixels, and that'll just select him without anything else. And now if we do that, and then we, I think, go to, yeah, edit, and then go to stroke, then we can actually create an outline. So let's say we want to make a black outline. So we select black, and then we want to do outside because we want to make it an outline. And then we hit OK, and we do 20 pixels. That's a good outline. And now he has an outline. It's a bit weird because the hair selection on the selection on his hair was a bit weird, but you get the idea. It'll create an outline of the selection. All right. Let's undo that. Now we want to do outline on text. So let's make our text visible again. And we have our text. So you would think that the way that you would do outline on text is you would select the text. So select pixels by right-clicking on this box right here, and then select pixels. So we have our pixels selected, and you'd think that you could just go edit and stroke, but as you can see, that is blacked out, or it's grayed out. And the reason that it's grayed out is that you can only do strokes and other types of editing on image files. You can't do it on text. And so what do? The way you do an outline on text is different. So the way you're going to do it is we've already selected the pixels, and now we're going to do select, modify, and it's going to have a little arrow, and then expand. And let's expand it by, let's say, 15 pixels. So now we have a highlight. Now we have a selection that is kind of an outline of our text. Now what we need to do is we need to right-click on our selection and say new layer. So that is going to create a new layer in our layers menu. And we want to make sure that this new layer is behind our text, like so. Now, if we go to the bucket fill tool, which is something that I probably should have mentioned a little earlier, but it's exactly what it sounds like. As you can see in that little tutorial, it allows you to just fill a space with a color. So let's say we want just a black outline, sure. So if we go to our bucket fill tool and we left click somewhere inside the selection while we have our layer 2 highlighted, not our text layer, but the one behind it, and we left click, we get our outline. It's a bit more convoluted for text, but you do get used to it, and all of this is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch this again to figure it out. All right. So I've already gone over it a little bit, oh yeah, and then one last thing about that, you can see the text layer and the outline layer are separate. So if you move this around, it won't move with the outline layer. So you're going to want to merge those together. So if we right click on this and we say convert to smart object, then we can convert that to an image layer, but you want to be careful because once you do that, you can't edit the text anymore. Also for outlining, if you wanted to, you could convert it to a smart object and then do the stroke method of outlining, but that requires you to have your text 100% down packed, not going to change like before you do that. So now we're going to convert to smart object, and we're going to rasterize it just like we would rasterize any image. And then we're going to hit merge down. So now our text layer and our background and our outline layer are together. So if we move one, the other moves with it. All right, so last thing that I'm going to be covering is the fill tool, the brush tool, and the color picker. So I've actually covered those things for the most part already. The fill tool is just the paint bucket tool. It does exactly what I already said it does. Let's say we want to make the background this color. We select the background, we fill tool. There you go. It's pretty straightforward. Paintbrush tool, I've also kind of already covered. It's this one right here. You go over here to change its attributes, and then you select a color to paint with down here with the color picker. Let's say we want red. Boom, we have our paintbrush. And then lastly, oh, well, the color picker, I think you get the idea of the color picker by now. All right. This is also helpful for, let's say, logos. So I'm actually going to pull up, you guys don't have access to this. I'm just going to pull it up real quick as a very quick demonstration. But give me 1 second. I'm actually going to pull up the Shutterslug logo for a moment. Here we go. All right, so here's the Shutterslug logo, as you can see. So let's say, okay, so I'm going to rasterize this. And let's say I want to make this Shutterslug logo green, right? I want it, everything else the same, but I want it to be green. Good way to do that would be to do the bucket tool, get green, and then just bucket fill. And it's a smart bucket fill, so if there's like a color edge, it'll recognize it. So like if I clicked out here, then it's just all green. But anyways, you get the idea. All right, I think that is just about everything that I was supposed to cover. Sorry, UV, I kind of cut into your time a bit, but hopefully we can manage to get through some of that. All right, any questions about any of that?
Could you let me know exactly how to select pixels? I wasn't able to catch that.
Yeah, okay. So selecting pixels, you can do it a few different ways. So in terms of selecting pixels on a layer, you see in the layer, there's this kind of bar here that's just the layer in general. And then there's this little highlighted box here that is kind of a mini image of the layer. If you right click on the box specifically, you get a different set of menu items than if you click on the bar. And if you click on the box, one of those menu items is select pixels. So if I select pixels of this, it just selects the outer edges of the layer. So you see it's not smart selecting the shape inside, it's just selecting the outer layer.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
After you expanded the selection, how did you apply the like outlining for the letters?
Okay, so let me go over that again. So for here, we have our letters. So let's select pixels. And then we want to expand this selection a little bit. It's going to look weird because we already did it, but it doesn't matter. So we want to expand it. So what we're going to do is, you see this select thing up here. We're going to left click select. And then we have this whole menu here. So if we go down this menu, we have this modify option here. If we hover over this modify option, we get these 5 options. And we're going to pick the expand option. If you want to make a selection smaller, you do contract. But for bigger, we do expand. Now we left click on expand, and that brings up this little window here. And it asks us how many pixels we want to expand by. And we want to make sure that this box that says apply effect at canvas bounds is checked. Then we hit OK. And as you can see, the selection is now expanded. And then you just do the rest of the steps that you need to do to continue the outline. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was able to do that, but I like when I clicked the bucket tool, there was like a circle with a line through it that said I couldn't fill the
Oh,
selection.
okay. Oh, you're probably, oh, you know what? Did you do the step where you made a new layer?
Oh, it has to be like a smart object or something.
Yeah, it has to be a smart object in order to bucket fill it. If it's a text layer, it won't bucket fill. So what you need to do is, that's why we create a new layer and put it underneath the text object so that we can fill it, and then the text object goes on top of it so it looks like an outline. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once again, this is all going to be recorded, so feel free to go back on the video and like slow me down to 25% speed and look over everything I do. But yeah, any further questions? All right, if there are no more questions, Yuvia, do you want to do a 5-minute break, or do you want to just go? I mean, I guess we're only 5 minutes behind schedule, so
let's do a temperature check. I know that everyone just got a lot of new material.
yeah, it's definitely a lot.
So how are folks feeling? We did schedule like a short break to either catch up or to just use the restroom, anything like that. So how are people feeling? Do you want to keep going, or do we want to take that break? If it helps, we're only going over a couple more tools after the break. Keep going. Okay. And if you do need to take a break, go for it. No worries there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and open up my own Photoshop. So I'm gonna be working on the hummingbird image that was in the folder to show y'all sort of how to do some more collage-y type stuff. Share. Okay. So once everyone is ready to go, I'll just wait a second for folks to open it. You can do the same process of creating a new canvas. For our purposes, it doesn't matter if your pixels are exactly the same size, because we're going to be cutting out most of the image anyway and then resizing it after. And Sabrina, I don't have the extra monitor, so I can't see if the chat is referring to me. So just let me know. Let me actually, excuse me 1 second. Okay, so what we're going to be going over is the pen tool. Like Will was saying, there's many ways to select a part of your image to be able to manipulate it, do other things with it. So we have our selection tool up here, our lasso tool, et cetera, your quick selection tool. But we're going to be focusing on down here, this pen tool, or P on your keyboard. So what this does is it allows us to make like very precise selections. So when you have a photo that's really nicely contrasted, like foreground, background, it's easy to use the select foreground tool. But let's say, I mean, I don't know if this is the best example, but let's just say you have like a messier composition and you want to go in and cut it out really precisely. So you can hit Command plus to zoom into your image, or you can change the percent that it is zoomed in. It makes it a lot easier to see. And then basically the pen tool uses path points. So you'll click to begin your path, and you're not going to stop clicking until you've gone around the part of the image you want to cut out and back to your original point. So as you can see, when I hover, let me make a second point. When I hover over this original image point, there's a little circle on the lower corner, which means I've come back around to the beginning, and it'll kind of seal off the selection. I don't know if the chat is for me. Are we good?
No, I'm just answering questions in the
Okay,
chat. Sorry.
great.
There's one thing from me for you, Beatrice.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I did close mine. Will, is your Discord active, or is that me?
It is not. I think it's you.
Oh, posted. Okay, excuse me, everybody. My programming for the arts class is really popping off right now. Oh, there we go. That was the wrong tab. Okay, there we go. So what you're gonna do is make selection points all the way around your image, and you can really zoom in like a lot to make these points. So straight lines aren't the only thing you can do. Let's say you get to like this wing here is pretty curved, and it doesn't really make sense to make a bunch of individual points all the way around. So you can click at the edge of the curve and don't let go, hold your click, and you can drag this line to fit your point. And then you can just carry on. So I'm gonna do this a little bit messily just for the sake of time, but y'all can follow along. Please do. So this is a pretty helpful tool for collage as well. And cutting out images that aren't really easy to distinguish from the background. So we're just gonna go over a little hummingbird. And I'll just cut a little bit of the branch. And you can always Command Z these points as well if you mess one up. It's not a big deal. I'm just gonna do this real sloppy. Okay, so once you get around to your original point, you'll click and that will seal your path. So let me move my stuff here. So what you can do with this now is to create a double click or right click and make a selection from this path. And here you can set your feathering radius, which basically just means like the hardness of how it'll cut your image out. Like if you just want it to cut out in a straight line and you're going to paste it right on a background and you don't mind that they don't really blend well together, you can set that to 0. But if you want it to be a little more naturally integrated, you can change this feather radius, which just like softens your edges. So we'll just set it to 5. And there's our selection. So it's a lot more time consuming than using your standard quick selection tools, but you'll get like a really precise outline. And just real quick, again, this is for time's sake, I'm just going to, you can copy this selection and paste it right onto a new layer if you just want to, work quick. So I have another one prepped here, another little bird that I cut out. I'm going to drag that to the top. Y'all don't have this image, and that's okay. And then with that layer selected, I'm going to paste my hummingbird. So it doesn't look like I did anything because I still have that hummingbird layer active. And I actually pasted it onto a new layer. But then once I erase my background, there's my bird. So this is really helpful to collage different elements. And like the prior demonstrations, you can move this little bird around. You can hit Command or Control T to resize it. And you can sort of make elements on your page interact however you want them to. So I think it's a pretty neat tool. Do we have any questions on that?
So when I was using the pen tool, when I clicked and dragged to make it curved, and then clicked somewhere else, it like wouldn't make a hard corner. It would like curve the line still. And I wasn't sure how to make that
I
all
know the
happen.
answer to this one.
Okay,
Okay, so the pen tool is a little funky that way. So when I actually personally, when I'm dealing with curves using the pen tool, I always just zoom in really, really close and do straight lines because curves are kind of funky. When you make a curve using the pen tool, what you're doing is you're causing the line to bend, and then you're creating a vector that it's going to follow when you create the next point. So if you create a curve that goes like this way and the vector's pointing that way, and then you make your next point over here, it's not just going to go straight to it. It's going to curve out like that and go to it, which can be a pain in the butt. So a lot of times I just do really tiny straight lines instead. But if you're in a situation where it just so happens that the vector you end on is the direction you want to go, that's a good time to use the curve of the pen toolkit to get a more precise and accurate curve.
awesome. I did not know that. That's really cool. Thank you. Okay, so was that the only question we had?
There's one more in the chat from Francis. How do you paste it onto the background layer again?
Oh, so once you've made your selection, you can literally just Command C, Command V, and it will paste it onto a new layer automatically. Once you're there, you can like merge the layers like Will showed us earlier. I like to keep them separate just so you can manipulate them individually, and then you can merge them once you're ready to export. Does that help?
Yes, that was helpful.
Awesome. One really, hopefully really quick text tool that's really neat on Photoshop, just because we didn't get to go over it earlier, is that Photoshop makes it super easy. Let me zoom in on that. To curve your text as well. So you can just go make your text box, highlight your text, go up to this T over a curved line. You can select your style, and it will show you all these different paths that you can edit the text on. So if I just want an arc, I can then change the bend of that arc. So if you want to do some fun stuff with text, that's a great way to do it. Okay, so then we also wanted to go over, well, that's fine, I'll just leave that there. We also wanted to go over really quick, just this is more of an image editing thing. I believe this image is also in the Google Drive folder. So if you are working with images that maybe, you know, you've made it clear that you might edit, let's say, some dust specks off, or if you're getting film photography submissions or anything like that, but also just for personal practice, let's say you have this little blemish in your photo, And this can apply to, you know, let's say you want to edit out, I don't know, some acne on a selfie, which you're beautiful just the way you are. But you can use the spot heal tool right here, or J. So what that does basically is there's, like Will mentioned earlier, there's some like simple versions of stuff and then more kind of like smart versions of stuff. So the spot healing brush tool literally just exists to kind of rewrite pixels of the image over this blemish. So once you've clicked it, you can resize your brush using your bracket keys. And then we're just gonna click once and it wipes it off. So in this case, you can definitely tell where the dot is, but not once you zoom out to like there. And it definitely works better on some images than others. So let's say it just really isn't working for us and we think it looks super obvious. Then we can go over here to the clone stamp tool. So the clone stamp tool is different in that you manually select the area of the image that you're going to paste the pixels onto. I don't know if I said that in a way that makes sense. So you can also adjust, I forgot about this. You can adjust your hardness in case you want like a really, you probably don't want a really solid line when you're doing this. You want it to blend into the background as much as possible. So I'm gonna resize this again. So to make a selection of where you want to paste this, you can just go over to a part of the image that's similar to where you want to rewrite it. So we can just go like kind of near to it. And we'll explain this a lot better than I'm about to, but when you pull a part of an image, you're gonna hit Alt or Option, I believe. Yeah. And it'll come up with this target. And that's what you're going to click to grab the part of the image that you want. So now you can see that I've selected these waves over here. And the difference in this between this and spot treatment is that essentially I have the information from the whole image behind this clone stamp. So for example, if I click over here, I've actually moved this section of the image over here. Will, please correct me if I'm like explaining this really badly.
Well, you've moved a copy of that part of the image over there. Yeah.
So we've got like the two kind of layered on top of each other now. And if I click, it just copies over that part. In this case, my hardness was really low, so it's pretty translucent. You can fix that by just going up here and changing your size and hardness. But now if I mouse over, you can see the rest of this area of the image is still attached to my mouse. So spot treatment is just like a one-off, you click, it rewrites, but clone stamp, you can keep going. You just can't like go back over here and like rewrite with the same copy of that image. Do we have any questions on that? Let me make this better. Okay, so there you go. No questions on that? Okay. The last thing we just wanted to go over quickly was exporting files when you're printing versus when you're publishing online. So let's say I've finished editing this photo, and I know that my publication is going to be all online, and I want to make sure that my, everything looks good. I can resize the image to fit on my website. So we're going to go to File, Export. And Photoshop has a really nice shortcut for this called Save for Web. So you're going to click that. And basically what this does is no matter what color space folks were submitting to you, it's going to convert it to sRGB. So those are the colors that are recognized by your monitors, whereas a printer uses CMYK, a different color space. So you can set the quality of your image right here. JPEG medium works fine for us. And then if you're constraining it to a specific size, for some reason, if your website might load slower if you load a bunch of large files onto it. So you can set your maximum pixel size to, like, let's say 2000, which will compress your image. And then you just hit save. You can retitle and export. Please save it in a way that's easier to find than that. But that's really helpful if you're getting a lot of different file types and you want to make sure that everything is like cohesive to be published to web. So that is the end of my section, and we're pretty much right on time. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. If you think of anything and just want to shoot us an email, feel free. Oh, thanks, Andrea. We'll be happy to go over different steps with you. Thanks for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. Hopefully this was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming. And also, for anyone who is curious, we have a Shutterslug meeting starting at 8:30, and you are all welcome to come join us. The link to join is on shutterslugphotography.org. So if you're interested in photography, feel free to come join us. It's very, very chill environment. But yeah, anyways, thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah. Woo.
Thank you.
We'll send out the link to the recording hopefully soon once it transfers to my computer.